At 52, I finally understood why my money kept disappearing. It was not because I was living an extravagant life. I was not buying designer clothes, taking expensive vacations, or eating at fancy restaurants every week. From the outside, I looked responsible. My bills were usually paid on time. There was food in the refrigerator, gas in the car, and enough money to get through most months. But somehow, whenever an unexpected expense appeared, I felt completely unprepared. A car repair could ruin my entire week. A higher electricity bill could force me to delay something else. And a simple trip to the dentist could send me reaching for a credit card. I kept asking myself the same question. Where did all my money go? The answer was uncomfortable because there was no single dramatic mistake to blame. My money was leaving in small, forgettable amounts. A few extra groceries I had not planned to buy, a subscription I barely used, a quick meal because I was too tired to cook, a household item bought just because it was on sale. None of those purchases seemed dangerous by itself, but together they quietly consumed everything I thought I had left over. Payday would arrive, the number in my bank account would rise, and for a few days I would feel safe again. I would pay the major bills, buy groceries, fill the gas tank, and then I would treat the remaining balance as available money. That was the mistake. The money was not truly available. It already had future responsibilities waiting for it. I just had not named them yet. The next insurance payment was coming. The car would eventually need maintenance. Christmas would arrive again. An appliance would break, and there would always be another medical bill, birthday, home repair, or seasonal expense. But because those costs were not happening today, I acted as if they did not exist. Then when they finally arrived, I called them emergencies, even though many of them happened every single year. One evening, after paying a bill with money I had planned to use for groceries, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, my bank statement, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. I was tired of feeling surprised by my own life. I was tired of working, paying bills, and still feeling as if one small problem could knock everything over. That was when I realized I did not necessarily need a more complicated budget. I needed to stop allowing my dollars to enter my account without instructions. Every dollar needed a job before I had the chance to spend it. Some dollars would pay the mortgage. Some would buy groceries. Some would wait patiently for the car insurance bill. Some would protect me from emergencies. And a small number could still be used for enjoyment. But none of them would sit in my checking account pretending to be free. At first, the idea sounded almost too simple, and honestly, a little boring. There were no dramatic money challenges, no complicated spreadsheets, and no promise that I would become rich overnight. It was simply a decision to tell my money where to go before the world found its way to spend it for me. I started with the money I already had, not the money I hoped to earn next month. I wrote down my current balance, listed every bill and expense that needed attention, and assigned each dollar to one specific purpose. When there was nothing left to assign, I stopped. The total in my account had not changed, but the way I saw it had changed completely. Instead of seeing one large balance, I saw many small responsibilities suddenly. The money for electricity could not become restaurant money. The money for car repairs could not become a new kitchen gadget, and the money for groceries could not quietly disappear into online shopping. I also stopped asking myself, can I afford this? Because that question was too easy to answer when there was money in the account. Instead, I began asking, which job will this money have to abandon if I spend it here? That one question changed everything, because every purchase now had a real consequence. Spending $20 was no longer just losing $20. It meant taking $20 away from groceries, savings, transportation, or some future bill. For the first time, my money was not disappearing. It was reporting for work, and although the system felt ordinary, almost painfully ordinary, it gave me something I had not felt in years: control. Once I decided that every dollar needed a job, the next question was obvious. What kinds of jobs should I give it? At first, I made the system far more complicated than it needed to be. I created too many categories, tracked tiny details, and tried to predict every possible expense, but that only made me tired. So I simplified everything into 5 basic jobs: monthly necessities, future bills, emergency savings, debt prevention, and personal spending. The first job was the most obvious: monthly necessities. This included the mortgage, electricity, water, groceries, transportation, insurance, phone service, and anything else required to keep daily life running. These expenses had to be funded first because they were the foundation of everything else. But even here, I had to be honest with myself. Groceries were necessary, but not every item I put in the cart was necessary. Transportation was essential, but unnecessary trips and convenience stops were not. Separating needs from habits helped me see where I had been using the word essential to justify spending that was simply familiar. The second job was future bills, and this category changed my financial life more than I expected. These were expenses I knew were coming, even if they were not due this week: annual insurance premiums, property taxes, car registration, holiday spending, birthdays, home maintenance, school expenses for family members, and seasonal utility increases. Before this system, I ignored those costs until they arrived. Now I divided the expected amount by the number of months remaining and assigned a little money to them every payday. The amounts often seemed small, but over time they became powerful. $20 here, $40 there, slowly building a cushion for bills that used to feel overwhelming. The third job was emergency savings, and I became very strict about what qualified as an emergency. An emergency was something urgent, necessary, and genuinely unexpected: a sudden medical expense, a major car problem, a broken water heater, or a temporary loss of income. A holiday was not an emergency. Car tires were not an emergency if I already knew they were wearing out. And an annual bill was definitely not an emergency. Making that distinction protected my savings from being drained by expenses that should have been planned for. The fourth job was what I called debt prevention. This was money reserved for irregular costs that were not true emergencies, but could still push me toward a credit card, appliance replacement, dental care, clothing, minor repairs, gifts, and household items all belonged here. This category became a bridge between normal monthly spending and serious emergencies. It gave me somewhere to turn when life became expensive without becoming a disaster. And the fifth job was personal spending. I nearly left this category out because I believed a responsible plan should be strict, but that would have been a mistake. I needed a small amount of money I could spend without guilt, perhaps on coffee with a friend, a book, a meal out, or something simple for the house. When enjoyment was included in the plan, I was far less likely to rebel against it. I stopped feeling as though every purchase was a failure because some dollars had been assigned specifically to make life enjoyable. These 5 jobs gave structure to my money without making the system impossible to maintain. And I learned that the exact percentages were less important than the intention behind them. During a difficult month, most of my money might go toward necessities. During a better month, I could strengthen savings or prepare for future bills. The categories could change, the amounts could move, but every dollar still needed a destination. One of the biggest changes was the way I viewed my bank balance. Before, I saw one large number and assumed it represented what I could spend. Now I understood that the balance was made up of many smaller promises. Some money belonged to the electric company, some belonged to next month's insurance payment, some belonged to a future repair, and some belonged to the version of me who might face an emergency. Just because all the dollars were sitting in the same account did not mean they were available for the same purpose. This simple idea prevented more careless spending than any complicated budgeting rule ever had. Because once a dollar had a job, spending it somewhere else felt less like freedom and more like taking an employee away from an important task. For the first time, my money was not one confusing pile. It was an organized team, and every member knew exactly what it was supposed to do. Once the 5 jobs were clear, I needed a routine simple enough to keep using, because I had tried budgets before, and most of them failed for the same reason. They demanded too much attention at the beginning and received almost none. After a few weeks, I would create a beautiful plan on the first day of the month, feel organized for several days, then stop checking it until something went wrong. This time, I did not want a perfect monthly budget. I wanted a small weekly habit, so I chose one evening each week and turned it into my money check-in. It usually took less than 20 minutes, and over time, those 20 minutes became more valuable than hours of worrying. I began by checking the real balance in my bank account, not the number I remembered from 2 days earlier. Then I reviewed every recent transaction, groceries, gas, bills, subscriptions, small purchases, and anything else that had left the account. I was not looking for reasons to criticize myself. I was simply making sure every dollar had gone where I intended. If I saw a charge I had forgotten, I recorded it. If a bill was higher than expected, I adjusted the plan. If I had spent less in one category, I decided where the extra money should work next. After reviewing the past week, I looked ahead, usually 7 to 14 days. I checked which bills were coming, whether the car needed fuel, whether I had appointments, birthdays, grocery needs, or any unusual plans. This small look ahead prevented many problems that used to surprise me. A bill was much easier to handle when I noticed it 10 days before the due date, instead of the morning it was withdrawn. The weekly routine also taught me that a budget should not be treated like a set of rules carved into stone. Life changes, prices change, and priorities change, so the plan had to move with them. If groceries cost $30 more than expected, I did not declare the entire month a failure. I simply moved $30 from a less important category, perhaps eating out, entertainment, or personal spending. The money was allowed to change jobs, but it was not allowed to become unemployed. That became one of my most useful rules. Every dollar could be reassigned, but it always needed a purpose. This flexibility kept me from using a credit card every time reality failed to match my original plan. Before, I believed that going over budget in one category meant I had already failed, and once I felt like a failure, I became careless. Now I understood that adjusting the plan was not cheating. It was the actual work of managing money. Sometimes I used a simple notebook. Sometimes I used a basic spreadsheet. And for certain categories, I used envelopes or separate savings accounts. But the method mattered far less than the habit. A complicated app could not help me if I refused to look at it, while a cheap notebook could completely change my finances if I opened it every week. During those check-ins, I also watched for repeating leaks, a subscription I kept forgetting to cancel, a grocery item that spoiled before I used it, a convenience purchase that appeared every Friday. These patterns were easy to miss in daily life, but obvious when I reviewed them together. I began canceling what I did not value, planning around my weak moments, and preparing simple solutions before I was tired or rushed. I kept easy meals at home so I would not order takeout, combined errands to reduce fuel costs, and waited to buy household items until I had checked what I already owned. None of these changes felt dramatic, but that was exactly why they worked. They did not depend on motivation. They depended on repetition. My weekly meeting became less about restriction and more about staying awake. It reminded me that I was still in charge before the month had a chance to get away from me. And gradually, I noticed that the system was giving me more freedom, not less. Because when every dollar had a job, I no longer had to guess whether I could spend something. I could look at the category and know, yes, this money was meant for that, or no, using it would take something away from a more important responsibility. Boring weekly attention gave me what dramatic challenges never had, consistency. And consistency was what kept small mistakes from turning into debt. The greatest test of my new system came from expenses that did not happen every month. Because those were the costs that had always pushed me toward debt, A normal month was usually manageable. I knew when the mortgage was due, I could estimate groceries, and I understood the regular utility bills, but then the car registration would arrive. The dentist would recommend work I had delayed, Christmas would appear, or an appliance would suddenly stop working, and I would feel as though life had attacked my budget without warning. The truth was that many of these expenses were not surprises at all. They were simply irregular. My car needed maintenance, whether I planned for it or not. Birthdays happened on the same dates every year. Winter heating bills were always higher, and household items eventually wore out. I had been treating predictable expenses like emergencies because I had never given them a place in my monthly plan. Once I understood that, I began creating small sinking funds, which was simply a practical name for money, saved gradually for a specific future cost. I started by listing the expenses that had caused financial stress during the previous year: car repairs, insurance premiums, property taxes, holiday gifts, dental care, home maintenance, clothing, appliance replacement, and higher seasonal bills. Then I estimated how much each category might require. The numbers were not perfect, but they did not need to be. An imperfect estimate was still better than pretending the expense did not exist. If I expected car maintenance to cost $600 during the year, I tried to assign $50 each month. If an annual insurance bill was $1,200, I divided it by 12 and saved $100 monthly. Those smaller amounts felt much easier to handle than one large bill arriving all at once, even when I could not save the full amount. Putting aside $20 or $30 created a cushion, and a partial cushion was better than an empty account. At first it felt strange to save for something unpleasant. No one becomes excited about setting money aside for tires, plumbing repairs, or a dental crown. But I began to see those savings differently. I was not saving for the problem. I was saving for the peace I wanted when the problem arrived. The first time I paid a large annual bill from money already waiting for it, I felt almost surprised. There was no panic, no transferring money from groceries, no credit card balance to worry about later. The bill still cost the same amount, but the emotional cost was completely different. Preparation had removed the fear. This method also changed the way I understood debt. I used to believe debt began with irresponsible shopping or major purchases, but often, debt begins when ordinary life costs more than we prepared for. A repair goes on the credit card, then a medical bill joins it, then interest begins growing, and soon we are paying for last year's problems with this year's income. Sinking funds interrupted that cycle. They allowed current income to prepare for future responsibilities instead of paying for old emergencies. Of course, life never followed my estimates perfectly. Sometimes the car repair cost more than I had saved. Sometimes 2 household problems happened in the same month. And sometimes I had to temporarily reduce one fund to handle something more urgent. But even then, the system helped. Having $400 saved toward a $700 repair meant I only had to solve a $300 problem, not a $700 crisis. That difference mattered. I also learned to look around my home and notice what might need attention soon: worn tires, an aging refrigerator, a leaking faucet, or a roof that would eventually need work. Planning did not mean worrying constantly. It meant accepting that useful things have a lifespan. Every time I noticed a future expense, I gave a few dollars the job of preparing for it. Slowly, my financial life became less dramatic. Not because nothing went wrong, but because fewer problems arrived without money attached to them. I stopped calling every annual bill, repair, and holiday an emergency. I began calling them part of life. And once I treated them as part of life, I could prepare for them. That was when I realized something important. Staying debt-free was not only about refusing to borrow money, it was about quietly saving for the expenses that usually make borrowing feel necessary. The system only worked because I gave myself a few simple spending rules, not complicated rules that required perfect discipline, but ordinary rules that protected me during the moments when I was tired, tempted, rushed, or emotional. The first rule was to wait before buying anything that was not necessary. For small purchases, I waited 24 hours. For larger ones, I waited at least 72 hours. This pause did not mean I could never buy what I wanted. It simply gave the excitement time to disappear. I was amazed by how many things felt urgent in the store and completely unnecessary the next morning. Online shopping made this especially important because it was easy to see something, click a button, and spend money before considering which job those dollars already had. Leaving an item in the cart for a few days helped me separate a real need from a passing desire. The second rule was that I never spent from a category without checking it first. I stopped trusting the total balance in my bank account because that number included money for bills, repairs, groceries, savings, and future expenses. Seeing money in the account did not mean I had permission to use it. I had to check the specific category. If there was enough personal spending money, I could enjoy the purchase without guilt. If there was not enough, I either waited, chose something cheaper, or deliberately moved money from another category. But I had to acknowledge the trade-off. The third rule was that money borrowed from savings had to be replaced. Sometimes I needed to move money temporarily because one expense was more urgent than another. But I wrote down exactly how much I had taken and created a plan to restore it. Without that rule, temporary withdrawals had a way of becoming permanent, and savings slowly disappeared without any single decision feeling serious. The fourth rule was to review recurring costs regularly: subscriptions, memberships, service plans. Automatic deliveries and small monthly fees could hide for years because they left the account quietly. Every few months, I asked whether each one still made my life easier or more valuable. If the answer was no, I canceled it. I stopped keeping services because I might use them someday. Money needed to serve the life I was actually living, not an imaginary future version of me. The fifth rule was never to spend expected income before it arrived. In the past, I sometimes made decisions based on a bonus, refund, overtime payment, or extra work I believed was coming. Then, if the money was delayed or smaller than expected, I was left trying to cover purchases I had already made. Now I only assigned dollars that were already in my possession. Future income could receive jobs when it reached the account, but it could not rescue today's careless spending. I also created a few practical habits around groceries because food was one of the easiest categories to overspend. I planned simple meals, repeated inexpensive favorites, checked the pantry before shopping, and used a list. I stopped treating every grocery trip like an opportunity to discover something new. Because novelty often became waste, I could still try new foods, but I chose them intentionally rather than filling the cart with hopeful ingredients that would later spoil. Another important rule was learning the difference between being able to make a payment and being able to afford something. A store might offer monthly payments that looked manageable, but affordability meant I could buy the item without weakening my important categories, without depending on future income, and without creating a long obligation for a short-lived purchase. This question protected me from turning small wants into months of payments. When extra income did arrive, I resisted the urge to immediately increase my lifestyle. I allowed myself a small portion for enjoyment, then assigned the rest to future bills, emergency savings, home repairs, or other goals. Earning more did not automatically mean spending more. Sometimes the system felt restrictive, especially when I wanted something and the category said no. But over time, that temporary disappointment became easier than the lasting stress of debt. The rules removed guilt because they made decisions clear. I no longer argued with myself in every store or worried after every purchase. The plan had already decided what was possible. Staying debt-free did not require one heroic decision. It required hundreds of ordinary decisions: waiting one more day, checking one category, cooking one simple meal, canceling one forgotten subscription, and refusing one payment plan. None of these choices looked impressive, but repeated quietly, they became the walls that kept debt from entering my life again. After living with this system for a while, I realized that being debt-free did not feel the way I once imagined it would. There was no dramatic moment when music played, the clouds opened, and I suddenly felt wealthy. The change was much quieter than that. I simply stopped feeling afraid of ordinary life. I no longer opened the mailbox with the same tension, wondering which bill might ruin the month. I did not panic when the car made an unfamiliar sound, and I stopped treating every expensive week at the grocery store as evidence that everything was falling apart. Problems still happened, prices still increased, appliances still broke, and some months were harder than others. But now, most problems had money waiting nearby, and even when I had not saved enough to cover the entire cost, I was usually starting from a position of preparation. Instead of panic, that was the real reward, not perfection, but stability. Giving every dollar a job also changed the way I felt about spending. Before, even small purchases could create guilt because I never knew whether the money should have been used for something more important. I might enjoy a meal out, then spend the next day worrying that I had been irresponsible. Now, when the personal spending category had enough money, I could enjoy that same meal without regret. Those dollars had been assigned to enjoyment, and using them for that purpose was not failure. It was following the plan. In a strange way, giving my money more rules gave me more freedom, because I no longer had to make every decision from fear. The system had already created boundaries, and inside those boundaries, I could relax. It also taught me what I truly valued. I discovered that I cared more about a quiet home than impressive belongings, more about sleeping well than keeping up with other people, more about having cash for a repair than having a new gadget delivered to the door. My priorities became visible in the jobs I gave my money. Security, independence, simplicity, generosity, and a little room to enjoy life. These values had always been important to me, but my spending had not always reflected them. Now, every payday became a small opportunity to align my money with the life I actually wanted. I also learned that this system did not require a large income to begin. Of course, more income can make certain goals easier, and there were months when I wished I had more to assign, but waiting for a perfect salary would have kept me stuck. Even when money was tight, giving each dollar a job helped me make better decisions. If there was not enough to fund every category fully, I could see the shortage clearly and choose what mattered most. Clarity did not create more money, but it stopped the money I had from slipping away unnoticed, and that alone made a meaningful difference. At 52, I stopped looking for a clever financial trick that would solve everything quickly. I stopped believing that one extreme month of saving could replace years of consistent habits. The system that kept me debt-free was almost embarrassingly simple. Write down what I have, decide what each dollar must do, prepare for expenses before they arrive, review the plan every week, and adjust without giving up. There were no secret formulas, only attention, patience, and repetition. If you are feeling overwhelmed by your finances, you do not need to redesign your entire life tonight. Start with the money you have right now, not next month's paycheck, not the raise you hope to receive, and not the refund that may arrive later. Look at the dollars already available and give each one a purpose. Perhaps some will pay the rent, some will buy groceries, some will wait for a future bill, and even if only $5 can go toward savings, give those $5 that job. Small assignments still matter, because every prepared dollar is one less dollar you may need to borrow later. This system will probably never feel exciting, and that is exactly why I trust it. Excitement disappears, motivation fades, and dramatic challenges eventually end, but a boring system can continue quietly for years, protecting you while you work, sleep, cook dinner, and live an ordinary life. Today, debt-free living does not feel like deprivation to me. It feels like knowing that my money has somewhere important to be and that I am the one deciding where it goes. $1, one job, and one peaceful month at a time. If this is the kind of financial life you want, start with your next dollar, write down the first job you would give it, share that job in the comments, and subscribe for more practical, honest ways to build a calmer life after 50.